This GeekWire podcast is brought to you by BECU. Stay tuned to the break as Brian Westbrook interviews BECU's Stacy Black for today's Money Hack about social media trends like loud budgeting. And for more money hacks, check out geekwire.com/BECU. Hi, it's Todd Bishop. Welcome to GeekWire. We are coming to you this week from the Showbox Sodo, the historic music venue south of downtown Seattle, where this week we are hosting the GeekWire Gala, our annual holiday celebration, which includes a recognition of 5 of the Seattle region's uncommon thinkers, inventors, scientists, technologists, and entrepreneurs who are transforming industries and driving positive change in the world. This is a great program presented in partnership with Greater Seattle Partners. On today's episode, we're going to be talking with several of our Uncommon Thinkers honorees in areas including fusion energy.
And as it turned out, my longtime collaborator, Brian Nelson from the University of Washington, was also a big fan of Frank Zappa. And so when we got together and decided what are we going to name our experiment, it was just obvious it was going to be Zap.
Commercial space.
I think space is a critical pillar for our civilization being able to scale in a way that's also sustainable. But I think those big visions are multi-generational problems. And for those to get solved, what we really need is a scalable, vibrant economy that is self-fulfilling.
Advanced protein design.
So the enzyme that we used is an enzyme that already works really well in acidic and warm conditions. It's made in a bacterium called Alicyclobacillus sendiensis, which grows in warm soils in Japan.
Easy for you to say.
It's not my first time.
And believe it or not, a process of turning radioactive waste into cancer treatment.
We have the actinium and can get it out to drug developers, and now they have enough material that they can go out and develop treatments to help cancer patients, whether they are suffering from prostate cancer, breast cancer, etc. So over the next few years, we really hope that some of those are going to come to the fore.
That's all coming up next on a special Uncommon Thinkers episode of the GeekWire Podcast. We are backstage at the GeekWire Gala. Part of this event every year is a program that recognizes the Seattle region's Uncommon Thinkers. Uncommon Thinkers is presented in partnership with Greater Seattle Partners. And on today's episode of the GeekWire Podcast, we're going to be talking with several of our Uncommon Thinkers honorees. I'm pleased to be joined now by Yuri Shumlak. He is co-founder and chief scientist at Zap Energy. He's a physicist leading a team in pursuit of the promise of fusion energy. Yuri, it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Can you describe the work that you and your team at Zap Energy do and your progress so far, and also the long-term potential of fusion energy for the planet and really the universe?
Absolutely. Maybe I'll start in the reverse direction. So the promise of fusion energy is really the opportunity to power our civilization in a way that doesn't destroy our planet, is completely carbon-free, essentially with a limitless fuel for endless power.
And how close are you in your work at Zap Energy to that? Are we talking years away, decades away, months away, days? Like where are you in the progress of fusion?
So I'm a fairly conservative guy, so I can feel confidently say we're not days, months, or even a few years, but maybe on the order of a decade until we get power on the grid.
And what does that future world look like when fusion energy is a reality, and how does it change the way that the world will work?
Well, so they've always said that fusion energy will be energy too cheap to meter, but I guarantee we'll meter it and charge. But nevertheless, it's going to be an energy supply that's independent of countries' natural resources, which immediately holds the opportunity to eliminate a lot of the conflicts in the world that are based around natural resources.
So earlier in your career, when you were pursuing your PhD at UC Berkeley, researchers elsewhere in the field were focused on these large, super expensive fusion devices with complicated systems of lasers and giant magnets. And my colleague Lisa Stifler did a great job explaining this in her profile of you. Because you took a different approach, pursuing smaller devices with simpler engineering. Tell us more about this and why it made sense to you, because I think to me it really illustrated how you are really an uncommon thinker.
And Lisa did a fantastic job in the article. What my motivation was really to try to find a simple and frankly elegant solution to coming up with a way to confine a plasma in a way that doesn't involve these large, expensive magnets or laser systems, that is higher risk but has the potential to be much more cost effective.
Was that ultimately the right approach? Do you think that your uncommon thinking in that scenario proved to be correct?
I would say we haven't proven it yet, but if it does end up being a path to fusion energy, then I think it will be the right path.
One of the catalysts for your interest in energy, no pun intended, was the 3 Mile Island meltdown in 1979. How so? In what way did that intrigue you? And what did you think when you saw the recent news that Microsoft plans to revive that facility?
So, to be clear, I am a proponent of nuclear fission as well as fusion. I think fusion is definitely the long-term solution, but there's a lot of promise in fission as well. And so, yes, so 3 Mile Island was something that intrigued me as a young student, and it's something that made me ask questions about, how is this done? What is the process that's involved in nuclear fission, and is there a better method?
I also loved this gem from Lisa's profile of you, which we'll link to from the show notes, and that is that the name Zap Energy is in part, not entirely, but in part an homage to a very specific musical artist. Can you tell us that story?
Yes, absolutely. So one of my favorite and first bands was Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. And as it turned out, my longtime collaborator, Brian Nelson from the University of Washington, was also a big fan of Frank Zappa. And so when we got together and decided what are we going to name our experiment, it was just obvious it was going to be Zap.
And of course, it's so awesome because he was one of the pioneers of jazz fusion, right?
Absolutely, that's correct, yes.
All right. So what's next for you in 2025 and the Zap Energy team? What does the roadmap look like from here?
So we need to push parameters higher. That is to get, we've achieved impressive conditions in terms of the plasma temperature and the amount of fusion reactivity and reaction rates. But we need to push higher. We need to go higher temperatures, higher densities, higher fusion reaction rates, and ultimately higher power so that we get to the point where we get to break even. So we get more energy out than we put in.
And then one last question for you personally or for your work at Zap Energy. Has artificial intelligence changed things for you over the past couple of years? Or is it still something that's more in the background and more hype than reality for you in your work?
So artificial intelligence definitely plays a role. You have to contain it a little bit in terms of the amount of hype, but in terms of being able to analyze data more rapidly and be able to provide answers to what the information is from the experiments telling us, artificial intelligence and machine learning has been invaluable.
Well, congratulations on your recognition as an uncommon thinker, and thanks very much for talking with us.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure and really an honor to be an awardee.
Yuri Shumlak is chief scientist and co-founder at Zap Energy. He's one of 5 of our Uncommon Thinkers for 2024, chosen through community nominations and a judging process recognizing inventors, scientists, technologists, and entrepreneurs who are transforming industries and driving positive change in the world. We'll be right back with our next Uncommon Thinker after this.
This GeekWire podcast is brought to you by BECU. Stay tuned as Brian Westbrook interviews BECU's Stacy Black for today's Money Hack about social media trends like loud budgeting. And for more money hacks, check out geekwire.com/BECU.
Are you a fan of the latest social media trends? Have you heard of financial advice from the comment section? How about loud budgeting? Stacy Black, lead financial educator with BECU, is here with me now. What is loud budgeting?
Loud budgeting really helps remove the shame when it comes to talking about finances. When I was younger, we never talked about money.
Yeah.
And now it's all about being loud and proud. Like, I am saving for my financial goals in the future. I want to buy a house. So it's being proud about that and letting people know that you could buy whatever you want, but you're choosing not to because you have financial goals in the future.
So it's kind of pivoting that shame around money and talking about money into ways that really just make you proud of it and give you something to look forward to. We'll talk about that and more social media hacks and social media tips and tricks on saving money and looking forward to your financial goals. That's all on Money Hacks at geekwire.com/BECU.
Listen to the full interview and find more episodes of Money Hacks at geekwire.com/BECU and find more information at becu.org. I am here with Ingrid Swanson-Poltz. She is the Chief Technology Officer at Mopac Biologics and Translational Advisor at the Institute for Protein Design at the University of Washington. And more to the point of what we're doing here today, Ingrid, you are one of our honorees in the Uncommon Thinkers Awards this year. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Your work is really fascinating. You're a microbiologist, and you led the development of really these gluten-destroying enzymes. I think of them almost like gluten-destroying missiles in some ways, with the potential to really improve the lives of people with celiac disease. Can you explain the basics of your work in protein design and enzymes and the promise of the approach for people who might not be familiar with what you do?
Yeah, so this approach began really as a specific project to treat celiac disease. And we thought about, how can you use protein design to treat this disease? And it had been known for a while in the field that enzyme therapy, where you give enzymes that, kind of like your digestive enzymes in the stomach, but enzymes that can break down the bits of gluten that trigger celiac disease, would be a great way to treat this disease. But using naturally occurring enzymes to do that is really difficult because the stomach is a harsh environment, and many enzymes have difficulty working in that environment. Not to mention, gluten is a very difficult protein to break down. So finding an enzyme that worked well in the human stomach and broke down gluten, and finally was specific for gluten, was difficult because, all three of those things really need to happen in order to have an effective treatment that's not affected by other proteins that we might eat during a meal. And so it really presented a great opportunity for protein design. So protein design is the generation of new proteins with novel functions or enhanced functions compared to what exists in nature. So instead of relying on evolution to give us what we need, we can instead use protein design to, in our case, change how an already existing protein works or make entirely new proteins developed in the lab. This was a while ago at the Institute for Protein Design, before the current machine learning methods came through. And we used the protein design methods at the time at the Institute for Protein Design to modify an already existing enzyme. So the enzyme that we used is an enzyme that already works really well in acidic and warm conditions. It's made in a bacterium called Alicyclobacillus sendiensis, which grows in warm soils in Japan.
Easy for you to say.
It's not my first time. So the enzyme already works pretty well in those conditions. And then we made changes in and around what's called the active site, or the part of the enzyme that it does the business of the enzyme, to change its natural target to gluten. And that allowed us to build this enzyme.
One of the details that I really loved from the story about you by Natalie Graham was that you showed the effectiveness of this in part on Dick's Hamburgers and Fries.
Yes, that's correct. Our work is based heavily in Seattle, so we wanted to use a local hamburger chain. The point of that experiment was to demonstrate that the enzyme can destroy the gluten effectively, even in the presence of meat protein and dairy protein. We're pretty proud of our Seattle roots, so we went to Dick's. And also PvP, the name PvP, harkens back to Seattle's video game roots. PvP stands for player versus player. It also stands for protein versus protein, because our enzyme is a protein and it targets gluten, which is also a protein. The name PvP was conceptualized by my husband, Scott Poltz, who works in the video game industry in town.
Very nice. And PvP Biologics is the company that you and your team founded, and you're now with Mopac. And as you mentioned, you've been working through the Institute for Protein Design, and many people may know that name in part because of the work of David Baker, who was just awarded the 2024 Nobel Prize. And you and your team were the first to produce a tangible and applicable manufactured enzyme from the work of that lab. What inspired you to make such an early bet on this work coming out of the UW's Institute for Protein Design?
Well, so this project began as an undergraduate student project for undergraduates that I was co-advising who participated in a competition called IGEM, which stands for the International Genetically Engineered Machine Competition. And the project, during the course of over 3 months in the summer, with the students, we developed just a prototype enzyme, so not ready for prime time. Had some serious limitations, but it did break down, some amount of a representative part of gluten in stomach conditions. We did a number of other projects with iGEM during the years, and they all were interesting, and they all, had big, lofty goals, but none of them really demonstrated actual potential like this project. And I also have a friend with celiac disease, and so it inspired me to take on the project as my postdoctoral project, and then we just kind of ran with it. The enzyme that we developed at PVP is now in phase 2 clinical trials with Takeda Pharmaceuticals.
How has artificial intelligence changed your work over the past year and a half? Has it changed your life at all? I'd be curious just about the impact overall of AI in what you do.
Well, so AI has had a fundamental shift in protein design in general. I don't know if you've heard of AlphaFold 2, but that's a protein structure prediction tool that came out of DeepMind. And that really rocked the world of protein structure prediction. And the Institute for Protein Design, took many of those learnings and machine learning concepts and applied them to protein design. And it has been tremendously successful versus the older, more physics-based methods that were previously used. And it cuts down the time required to get to a successful lead candidate, the number of leads that you need to test. It's just kind of fundamentally improved protein design in general. At MOPAC, we're starting to use those methods to generate new molecules that have the potential of having characteristics that we just wouldn't be able to make with any naturally occurring proteins.
You're being recognized here as an uncommon thinker, and I've asked other honorees before, like, what makes them an uncommon thinker? And a lot of people sort of shy away from that label. But I am curious, you looked at problems that others also saw, but you figured out a different way to do it. What was the secret? What was the sort of formula behind this sort of path of uncommon thinking that you took?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and shy away from that label. But this was a project that, I really took the reins on, but that a lot of people participated in this project. And, the conceptualization of this project, the initial concept, I certainly can't take, whole credit for. There were a lot of people involved in this project, including the iGEM students and Dr. Justin Siegel, who is now at UC Davis, David Baker, and a number of other people. I think working with really smart, inspiring people is one of the main joys of my work.
Ingrid Swanson-Poltz is Chief Technology Officer at Mopac Biologics, Translational Advisor at the Institute for Protein Design at the University of Washington, and one of our Uncommon Thinkers honorees here at the GeekWire Gala, where we're backstage at the Showbox Sodo. Ingrid, thank you very much for talking with us.
Yes, thank you very much.
We will be right back with more Uncommon Thinkers after this. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop. We are here backstage at the Showbox Sodo, where we're honoring a group of the Seattle region's uncommon thinkers. And I'm joined now by one of those uncommon thinkers, Chris Dunkley. He is the Director of Chemistry and Engineering at TerraPower Isotopes. He's a chemical engineering leader pursuing novel uses for radioactive waste. Chris, it's great to have you here.
It's nice to be here. Thank you.
So you are effectively, you and your team, turning radioactive waste into cancer therapy. Can you give the basics of your work that you and the team at TerraPower Isotopes are doing for people who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, sure. So back in 2015, our team became aware that the Department of Energy and IceTech were going to be downblending essentially radioactive waste that existed in the different areas of national labs and wasn't useful for power or for other things and needed to be made safe. But it contained a isotope called thorium-229, which is super scarce, totally man-made, and really won't be made again, but could be used to make actinium-225, which is really useful for cancer treatments. So not by itself when connected to targeting agents. But our team were really interested in trying to save the thorium before it got buried. And so we managed to make a connection with the DOE and with IceTech and figure out a way to accelerate their program at the same time as making the thorium available for us. And if you jump forward to what we're doing now, we've managed to develop a process to get the actinium from the thorium. There's a lot of research gone into this for a long time, showing actinium's useful, showing some ways to make it. And we jumped onto that research and tried to add to it. We're now, as of this year, producing weekly, getting actinium out to drug developers. And hopefully in a few years, that will turn into some people making some really valuable treatments for cancer.
What is the promise of what you're doing and what impact could it have on the world?
Oh, certainly. So the answer is that targeted alpha therapy is just a really promising treatment for cancer. There's a lot of companies investing in different drug products based around isotopes, but the isotopes are generally pretty scarce, or there's one issue or another that causes problems. Actinium is unique. It's pretty much the best out of the options out there, but it's been very, very scarce. We have this unique ability to harness the thorium-229 to make actinium. It's unique because the thorium is scarce, and we managed to save the material that's there, then build on technology that had already been proven and try to make it efficient and put it into production commercially. And so we have the actinium and can get it out to drug developers, and now they have enough material that they can go out and develop treatments. And those treatments really are pushing forward and trying to offer ways to help cancer patients, whether they are suffering from prostate cancer, breast cancer, etc. So over the next few years, we really hope that some of those are going to come to the fore.
So one of the things that really came through in the profile of you by my colleague Lisa Stifler was your knack for team building and your focus on the value of teamwork in addressing big problems. What are some of the specific things that you've learned in creating teams and working with teams and leading teams that others might benefit from?
I think good science comes down to asking good questions. So you need to create that environment. You need to get people who are creative and willing to go out there and think outside the box and ask those questions. And then you need to create an environment where you can really get into it and have good conversations. Most typically, the ideas that we have that actually turn into something are the sum of different people's ideas coming together, or an idea that might not quite work, getting amended and getting fixed through conversation. And building those teams is really essential to solving difficult problems.
Tell me more about your team at TerraPower Isotopes. I mean, like, what kinds of people do you work with? Is it multidisciplinary? Are they mostly scientists? And what's it like leading that kind of team that you're in charge of?
Yeah, so on my team, we have radiochemists, which is a really unique skill set. It's chemistry on really complicated things. The radioactive elements we deal with, they have different chemistry to a lot of the periodic table. And so it takes this unique breed of chemists to know about it. And so a couple of groups within my team work on that, and they understand how to manipulate the material and also analyze it to understand its purity and what it contains. But then we have what you'd say is more standard engineers like me, who know about how to develop processes with multi-steps, how to make them efficient, how to develop tools. We've got a great set of mechanical engineers and systems engineers who know how to build the tools that help us to produce actinium efficiently. And then obviously in any startup, you need the people who can have the vision for how to get the resources to get the job done and get the backing to get the job done. And we're really fortunate having really patient and willing backers behind us who are willing to see us through. It's not easy what we've done. It's taken a lot of years. But having that backing that we could get there, really sharpen our process and get it to the point where it's efficient and then get it out and producing actinium is really good.
Scott Claunch, the president of TerraPower Isotopes, describes you as an upbeat and inclusive person and also very disciplined in your decision making. How do you make decisions?
Well, those were really generous words. I think, really making decisions on the basis of data and being able to say when there isn't data to make a decision. So make the decision at the right time. And then I think you can compartmentalize the different parts of a difficult problem into the technical things that influence the time and what you're trying to do, whether it's a decision that you can make and then get data and then reverse or not. So I really try to break down the problem and be objective, and then only make decisions at the right time and make them on the basis of data.
How has artificial intelligence changed your work, your field over the last couple of years, if at all?
You know, we're in this unusual case where the chemistry that we're working on is often from 50 years ago. But artificial intelligence really offers a lot of promise across the industry. I can really see it making a difference to the drug developers as they develop targeting agents to bind our actinium to. And then, in general, I think there's promise for us in making our planning, our work go more efficiently. All those tools could be really useful. We're not quite there in terms of deploying it in a large scale in what we do, but I think there's promise for the future.
Chris Dunkley, the Director of Chemistry and Engineering for TerraPower Isotopes, thank you very much for talking with us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, we are here with another of our uncommon thinkers, Andy Lapsa. He is an aerospace engineer and CEO of Stoke Space, which is a company focused on developing fully and rapidly reusable space vehicles. Andy, a lot of people have heard about reusable rockets and maybe even seen them, but why is this work important to you, and why is it important to the world long term?
Well, I think the space economy is very young. It's still day one in our entire industry, in my opinion. And I think that for where we are as a civilization, space is a very, very important problem for us to tackle, both for our sustainable expansion outwardly, but also to understand the world that we live in and help make life on Earth sustainable in the long run as well. So space is one of those very, very important problems for our generation to tackle. And the way you do it is with vehicles that, first of all, have a very small footprint, but also lower costs, increase availability, and increase reliability so that we can transact with space in a way that's similar to the way we do movement of goods and services throughout the world.
You're taking a different approach at Stoke. You're focused on this liquid-cooled heat shield for the second stage rather than, for example, the ceramic tiles that are used by SpaceX. How did you and your colleagues come up with this approach, and what does it say about the way that you think?
Well, I think the first thing is some ways it's different. In other ways, it's not that different, right? It's a two-stage to orbit vehicle. It's very similar in that context to the way we've been flying to space since the beginning. I think that the economics of fully rapidly reusable vehicles are undeniable. It is the inevitable end state of the industry. And so the question is, how do you solve that? And how do you do it as simply as possible? And so the two-stage to orbit vehicle is, I think, the way to do it. We have a playbook to reuse the first stage. We really don't have a good playbook to reuse the second stage in a way that's rapidly reusable, and that's very key to this whole thing working. And so, when we founded, we set out to try to crack that nut and solve that problem. The answer to your question is both my co-founder and I come from a rocket engine development background. And the way you cool the inside of a rocket engine is to regeneratively cool it by pumping liquid coolant through the skin or the walls of the engine in order to keep it cool and help it survive the very intense environments. The environment inside the engine is about 20 times more intense, the thermal environment, 20 times more intense than it is on re-entry. And so when we started thinking about this re-entry problem, we said, well, from a thermal perspective, it's not actually too hard of a problem as long as you use this liquid-cooled solution. So that really stuck in our heads. And look, it wasn't easy to solve it because you do have to do it in a way that's mass efficient and still serve the mission. But we were able to put our heads together and come up with a solution I think is rock solid.
As you mentioned, your company is also a story of a founding duo. Your co-founder, Tom Feldman, is the company's chief technology officer. How do your skills and approaches complement each other? And is there anything other founders can learn from your experience working together with Tom?
Well, I would say that both of our backgrounds are actually pretty similar in that they are both very technical. I did start to drift into some program management roles toward the end of my time at the last job. Now, when we founded and we started to work on this problem, and especially as we started to go and write proposals and start communicate outwardly and ultimately look for investment, we realized very quickly that we couldn't get anything done if we both tried to do both things. We had to draw the line and divide and conquer. And so in some ways I drew the short straw and took on the CEO and CEO role, and Thomas stayed and really focused on the technical side. I think it's worked really, really, really well. We've had a lot of success getting our company to where it is. We still have a long road to go, but that was very key early on to recognize that and divide and conquer.
One of the things that really comes through in my colleague Alan Boyle's profile of you, which is great, apart from the technologies, that you're focused on the market. You're really thinking about where the potential is for commercial space, whether that's low Earth orbit or the moon or Mars. Where do you see the biggest potential right now?
Well, the first thing I would say is that there's a number of very grand visions, and I'm a full supporter of all of those visions. I think space is a critical pillar for our civilization being able to scale in a way that's also sustainable. But I think those big visions are multi-generational problems. And for those to get solved, what we really need is a scalable, vibrant economy that is self-fulfilling. And so you need to have competition in that economy. You need to have multiple verticals in that economy. And most importantly, you have to have profitable business cases. For that to happen, you have to drop costs, improve availability, etc. Look, there's a number of different verticals that are emerging. Telecommunication is obviously a great one that probably gets the most attention. There's also imaging, surveillance, observation. There's many, many different business cases that can be made, both from higher resolution imagery, but also multispectral imagery that are starting to become really, really interesting, especially with the added layer of AI coming to the forefront. So I think you're going to see more and more of that. I think that manufacturing in space, believe it or not, I mean, it sounds a little bit crazy to most, but manufacturing in space for things that have very, very high price per kilogram on the ground start to make sense. So these are things like biopharmaceuticals, artificial replacement tissues for things like eye retinas and things like that have an incredibly high price per kilogram on the ground, where the launch cost is not actually that bad. But I would also say, there's many, many more. We could ramble on this answer, but I would say that even in telecom, the deployment cost of these satellite constellations, between 50 and 70% of that cost is spent on launch, which means it's just it's the single biggest line item in the cost of deployment. And because of that, it's an enormous headwind for the industry. And so to really proliferate and make some of these other business cases and verticals work, we have to knock down the cost. We have to improve the availability. So launch is still the bottleneck, and that has yet to be solved.
And that's what you're tackling with the whole idea of making these affordably reusable.
That's right. Yeah, that's why we're focused on that problem.
Andy Lapsa, congratulations on the recognition as an uncommon thinker, and thanks very much for talking with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the honor. It really is pretty humbling. It's cool to see, and really appreciate it. Thank you.
Andy Lapsa is an aerospace engineer and the CEO of Stoke Space, which is a company focused on developing fully and rapidly reusable space vehicles.
Thanks to the uncommon thinkers who spoke with us on this week's show. You can read the full profiles on GeekWire.com, including my piece on our fifth Uncommon Thinker honoree, Hannah Hajashirzi, who was not able to join us this week. She's a leader at the Allen Institute for AI and the University of Washington, who specializes in open source artificial intelligence models.
Curt Milton edited and produced this episode, sitting right here with me in the Showbox Soto green room. Until next time, I'm Todd Bishop. Thanks for listening to GeekWire.